Welcome everybody. Now, in this video, I want to give you a sort of look around the outline of my property. As you can see, I have a visual aid on my shirt here. This is the outline of the property. You can see that it's, right off the bat, not rectangular. It's an irregular shape. Most properties are rectangular, mine is not. Now, I mentioned in the very first video, and probably a few times afterward, that this property was once part of a farm. Somebody bought the farm, funny, and they chopped it up into 6 different lots. It was a roughly 40-acre farm. 2 lots on the farthest ends from the corner are bigger. They're like 10 acres apiece. The other 4, including mine, are about 5 acres. Now, to make those lots work, they made 2 of them out of the 6 irregular shapes, not rectangles. Mine and my neighbor, my house is about here. The neighbor across from me here, hers is also cut out by this traffic. So that there's traffic going by. I'm out by the road, by the way. And so hers has a little nut cut out here that is part of my property. And it's to justify the rest of them being rectangular and to make sure that they're about 5 acres, which seems to be about the minimum that they wanted for people to build homes on these places. Mine was the last one sold, probably because of its irregular shape. You see it's kind of like a stair step going on here, or overhead view of a stealth bomber, something like that. It's yeah, it's a little weird. But anyway, this is one difference is the size of it. One difference between city life and rural life is the size of our properties here. This is 5 acres. You wouldn't get 5 acres in cities. The cost of land is also a difference. There can be several differences here. But back to the whole point of these videos. But this is one of them. On a 5 acre plot of land in a city, you'd build, if you're going to build a single family home, you'd build a monstrous complex, because you have a lot of money. But, more likely than not, you wouldn't even have that in a city. It's just a big old piece of land. But that's what we have out here. Land is not at nearly the premium out here that it is in a big city. So, you can see next to me, I've got this post here. There's actually 2 posts. This is like a fence type post that you tie metal fencing around. This little tiny skinny little rod is a property line marker. We've only got a couple of those to mark off our property lines, but we figure it out. The rest of it, it's fine. But yeah, that will come into play later. So something to notice. Anything beyond that line, which includes the row of trees, is not mine, and that will definitely come up later too. There's a story behind that. There's always a story. It's the whole reason I make these videos, is tell stories, right? So yeah, that will come up in a bit. But yeah, this is the edge of my property, right by the road that's down here. I am right at this corner, and this is the road. So pardon me while I teleport over to the other corner of the property over that way. We have teleported to the other side. This is right here. This is the frontage. You have to have a certain amount of frontage to have to be able to build a home on a piece of property that's frontage on the road. It's a dirt road, and about 1,000 feet down it, where my driveway is, at least probably 1,500 maybe to here from the nearest paved road, right out there. So behind me, you see there's no stake here to show where the property line is, but we do have this. This is the tap for our phone line. Basically, it's where they tap into the main phone cable that runs along the road and split it off to your house. And that's what we use as our thing. We had a landline phone for the first 5 years that we lived here, but it's kind of a rip-off. In the age of cell phones, it's not worth having a landline phone. But yeah, so this is where we are. this corner. And so in cell phones, you could have full service. We had 3 people living here. We had 3 cell phones, and we were paying probably less than what we were paying for our landline. They really rip you for those. And you don't get internet service through your phone company out here. Like when we did, it was dial-up in the 2000s. Yikes. Internet service just in general is a sore spot out here in rural America. And I'll get into that in another thing. I am uploading YouTube videos, so it's obviously not dial-up level, but it's not great. It's pretty spotty. Living, especially in a rural area like here, living in the thumb of Michigan, there's nothing up here to build to. So unlike rural areas where they build through them to get from one place to another, there's nothing to build to up here. So it's very spotty to get wired broadband internet throughout here. So it's kind of iffy. But it works, and I'm okay with it. I would prefer it be better, but it is what it is. But yeah, this is the edge. This is my neighbor's lawn. You can see a sort of stripe there between where we cut. We fairly well agree on it. This is basically the property line bit. It's because he weeds around it. If I was more motivated and my weed whacker was not such a touchy little bugger, I would probably have cut those down a little bit. But yeah, so what? Leave them like that. It'll be fine. When I feel like it, and it decides to work well for me, I'll do it. Maybe. Wouldn't hold my breath. Anyway, so that's it for down here. Let's zoom on to the back. And here we are at the back of the property. It's this corner. I'm a little bit ahead of it, but close enough. You can see behind me this tall weeds. This is like right where I end up mowing. It's not quite the actual property line. My property probably extends between 1 and 3 feet beyond that line. But, it's as far as I mow. Just sort of leave it as a sort of fence row of weeds. You can sort of see that my neighbor doesn't cut much of his over here either. Basically the whole back half of his property he doesn't cut. Except you can see a path that he mows around there. That's for 4-wheelers and things that he drives around there. And that's cool. Do what you want to do. You don't have to cut every bit of your property. You can leave some of it growing wild. I, in fact, do, and you will see that coming up pretty soon here. So you can see this is where the 3 properties meet. This is my neighbor over here. This is mine, but my neighbor is right behind it. And this is obviously mine. But yeah. So you're going to see in a moment where I don't cut my property. And we'll teleport there now. Boom. Here we are on the other side. Now, I'm not actually at the corner. Back here a little bit. You can see behind me this is not cut. This is a part of my property that I don't cut. It's really low. It is very wet back there. You can kind of see in some places that it grows phragmite and a lot of goldenrod, things like that. There's goldenrod everywhere. If I left my lawn grow, it would look more or less like this, or what you saw in the other one. It's just the goldenrod and phragmite and some other things would take their place among the lawn. But yeah, that's what grows back here. There's also a lot of reeds. You'll see those in the next little bit. Get to this corner. Toward this corner. Also behind me you can see the barn there. That was the barn for the farm here. And likely the house next to it was probably the farmhouse as well. But it's been maintained. It's probably a 100-year-old barn, likely. Unless they built a new one in the process, they may have. And, it's been maintained, because if you don't maintain them, it's a wood building, and over 100 years in a fairly wet climate in general, it's going to get wet, and the wood's going to rot, and the beams will break and it will fall down. We've had barns near here fall down and collapse within the last 5 years or so. It happens. It's a thing. If they fall, if you don't keep them up, they're gonna fall. She renovated it, put all that, the new roofing on there and all that good stuff, and it keeps the rain out. And she, my neighbor behind me there, she set it up with sound system and such. She was going to have barn dances there, but that's probably not what the events mostly are. They're usually more like weddings and graduation parties and things like that. And there's a sound system in there, and you can hear it from my house, but it's not that loud. It's there, but it's not deafening like it would be like if your neighbor in the city had something like that. And so it's fine. I have no issue with it. And good on her for making a nice cottage industry on her property there. And it was pretty busy this summer actually. She had people in there a lot of different weekends. So that's cool. Good on her. I'm glad she's having some success with that. That's pretty cool. And I don't have any real issue with the sound. I can sort of hear the music, but it's not like it's blasting me out or I can't hear my own television or something like that. So it's fine. I can live with it. So yeah, that's this chunk. So teleport over to there. And here we are around this corner, a little back from it. And you can see the cattails behind me. It's kind of reed. It has a puffy top on it. It looks like a cat, like when it gets scared and puffs out its tail. Tries to make itself look big. That's what you have. And it's fluff. If you knock it off, it just goes everywhere. It's a big mess. But yeah, that's what those are. It's wet back here. This is why it's never been mowed. My dad never mowed it. I'm not going to mow it. It's just not useful land. So, and it's tucked away from the house. It's way in a corner here. You can't even really see it from the house. So, it's fine. We just leave it as it is. Just like how my neighbor leaves like the back half of his property, and other people leave chunks of theirs. It's absolutely fine. No problem with it. But that's the whole back of the property. That's back here. So we're gonna move on ahead. I'll give you a look at another piece, and we're gonna see something that you haven't really seen before, and you may have noticed its absence, but you're gonna see some now. So let's teleport over there and find out. Okay, so now we're over here, and you can see for the first time something that you haven't seen yet. It's a fence. This is another difference between here and the city. We don't generally fence off our yards. They're huge. It's a big, expensive undertaking to build a fence all the way along your yard. Never see that in the city. In the city, every backyard is fenced to keep it kind of private. It's a wood fence, or it's a block wall, or it's something. But building one of those out here would break you. It's just really expensive. She has one. There's a reason for that. She has sheep, livestock. She used to have domestic geese too, or white ones that you raise for meat or down feathers for pillows and things like that. But I don't think she has the geese anymore. But she definitely does have the sheep still. And you don't want them out wandering around on their own. And you definitely don't want the coyotes, which are probably the biggest predatory animal around here, getting in there to go and eat them. So she built a fence around. Now this is probably the easiest, cheapest kind of fence to build. Mostly metal posts, some wood ones, I guess. There's wood ones here too, with the wire fencing around it. It's it's a minimal expense fencing, but it does the job. It keeps your sheep in. You can also see that everything's grown up around it. There's a pond right back over there, and this ground is sloping quite heavily toward this side, so it's low and it's wet still too, and you can still see the cattails around it. It's very wet in there too. She doesn't mow to there. That's fine. The stuff grows up, and it's kind of a privacy spot between us. There's also trees later on that have grown up, and I can't really see into there anymore. It's okay because privacy keeps my prying eyes out of her area and keeps hers out of mine. So it's always good. It's always good to have a little bit of privacy between neighbors. So, and she's probably the one I'm closest to physically. So good thing. But yeah, fencing. You don't really see it. Even in the towns where they have significantly smaller properties, they don't really build fences around their yards. It's sort of strange. It was weird to see, having grown up in the city. Every place I ever lived there, had fencing around it, around the backyard, to make it a sort of private space for your family. But they just don't do it here in rural America. It's just not really a thing. You don't see very much fencing, especially not fully fenced yards. So that's a little something, another little difference. So let's move on to the next corner. This was here, by the way. I think I told you that. So yeah, teleporting away. And we're back. We're at the other corner of that same neighbor's property. This is the last bit of mine that butts up against hers, and the next last bit on the whole property. It is right here. You can see the end of her fence. Goes around the corner there. Splits her off from the neighbors on the corner. And, more overgrown area from the neighbors on the corner. We'll get into that in a moment. Because that's the big story here. So, yeah. This is just more of the property. You can see the trees. And like I said, it helps with the privacy. They work both ways, so privacy for her, privacy for me too. So cool on that. I'm perfectly happy with it. Anyway, not much to talk about here. Let's pour it over to the final spot. And here we are. This is the final corner right here. We're 20 feet from my house, from where I'm standing. Maybe something like that, in the corner of my house, and it's real close to the property line. We have the stake here. It's the other stake that shows the edge of the property, and this will get into the story in a bit. You can also see behind me this burning bush. This is at the end of that row of pine trees that is right on the other side of my property line. So let's talk about that. The people who live on that property now are not the same people who lived here when we moved in. Our house, ours was the last chunk of property sold, probably because of the irregular shape. And we built our house and foundation and stuff. Ours is the newest foundation for our house among these 6 pieces of property. But it's not the newest house. That goes to the neighbors on the corner here. Let's have a little look to that, shall we? They built a new building. They had a modular home brought in after we had moved in here, after we'd finished and moved in here, not long after. They come in on trailers, just 2 pieces. You take the old one off, put them on, attach them to the foundation, stick them both together, run all the wiring and whatever else, and plumbing pipes and gas pipes or anything else that goes in there, and hook them up to the services down below. And then you have a house, and it's like in a day, brand new house. Cool. It works. This is a lot less work than building this was over a year. So yeah, they had that. And around that same time, they started. At that point, you can see that there's a area that isn't mowed in between me and them, and it's on their property. You could see that beyond that, they do mow. About around the house, they mow the lawn. There's a pond there, and that's sort of the end of it. You can't see it from here, but it's there. Anyway, you could see all that, and that was about what it was like when we moved in. But once they built the new house on their property, they started mowing everything around here. And they just sort of brush hogged down what was there, so it looked like what that rough stuff is right there, all the way up to here. But they started, they brush hogged it and just cut off all the brush and anything else, and then just mowed. And, it's the same sort of stuff that you see in my video about my lawn in the back here. It's, native grass, sort of meadow grass, mixed in with Queen Anne's lace or wild carrots or whatever you want to call them, and buckhorn and various other weeds. And, they mowed it down, and it makes an okay lawn. It's, it's a lawn. it's a low hassle kind of lawn to put into place. So that's what they did. And they started, by the way, this is right here, just in case you know. This is the final spot. Well, the first place I was at was right here, right in line with it. And so, they started mowing it down. And this is before we put in our lawn. We just moved in. Now my dad wanted to put in seeded lawn in the front, to make it nicer, less weed in the area. They're getting in there now. They find their way in, but it's still significantly nicer than the stuff in the back or the stuff over here. You can see this part here. It has the same sort of brown texture to it that my back lawn does when I showed you the video of what it looked like after I cut it. And this part, I actually mow. They don't mow. The people who lived there before did mow this for a bit. But then we went in and tore out this area. My dad went over it with a rototiller attachment on the back of a tractor, a rotavator if you want to call it that. It's like if you've ever used a rototiller in your garden, those are about yay wide at the front. They have little spinning knives, we call them, to chop up the dirt down a few inches. And this is like that, but it's like 4 feet wide, and it runs off the power takeoff from the tractor's engine, so it's powerful. And he tore out what was here, the weeds and things that were in here, all the way to the road, all the way down there. And on the last pass, at the end, he got a little bit off. And so for the last 200 feet, let's say, he veered off, and maybe by the road, it might have been, a very generous estimate would be 3 feet over onto their property. And so he tore out some of their weedy, natural lawn. And we very quickly seeded everything, including the part of theirs that we took out. Now, remember, we're talking 200 feet long, 3 feet wide at best at the road. It's a triangle. If you remember your formula for triangles from school, it's 1/2 of the base times the height. So 3 feet base, 200 feet height, length. And that's 600. Cut it in half, 300 square feet of their weedy lawn he took out. And we very quickly seeded it, including that part, with actual nice ornamental grass that you would plant for a lawn. But that was not enough. Whether it was, I don't know if it was the husband or the wife, or both of them, they were very upset by this. They didn't come and yell at us or anything about it, but they did start doing some passive-aggressive things about the property line from us going over there. And technically right now I'm trespassing. I'm beyond the property line. But these people are much cooler. They don't really care. In fact, like my dad started mowing. Well, we'll get into it. Anyway, first they set up a bunch of stakes along this line of the property line. Put up a string along them, a string line, like telling us that the property line is there. Like, yeah, we know it was an honest mistake. He got a little bit off. He veered a little to the left. It happens. Tractors are not the most precise things in the world, especially for a guy. While he did drive them growing up and into adulthood, it had been almost 30 years at that point since he'd been regularly driving one. So yeah, he's a little rusty maybe. He got off a few feet by the end. Good grief, cut it some slack. We replaced your lawn, get over it. Anyway, the 300 square feet wedge of your lawn it's better now, but it's not good enough. So they first put in that. Then at this stake right here, they put in these two at an angle. This is showing the corner of the property. They put in these two bits of, it looks like white picket fence, but it's made out of PVC. They just put them up right there. They're about 4 feet wide, each one, right up there. Just this is the property line. No kidding. We know. We got a little bit over. Excuse us. We rectified it. Jeez. But it happened, and it's just one of those things between neighbors. And eventually, they planted that row of pine trees. Now, let's give it a little turn here. You can see these. You can see the pine trees. Now, one part that they didn't mow is the part up by the road there, where all those trees are. That is part of their property. They don't mow that. That is wetlands, swamp. Back in the day, you probably would have drained it out and filled it with dry dirt and try and make something out of it. But we've learned that draining actual physical swamps is probably not the best thing in the world because they serve an environmental purpose. They're kind of a filter place inland, so wetlands. They're also a habitat for a lot of frogs and toads and things like that. They're useful. They drain a lot of toxins out of things. They're good. But so you wouldn't be allowed to do that by most states' Department of Environmental Quality, or here in Michigan, it's the Department of Environment and Great Lakes, because we're surrounded by Great Lakes. So yeah, you got that additional concern. But they call it Eagle. But it's, that's, they wouldn't allow you to do that anymore. So that's probably going to remain just how it is. Wetlands. So nobody ever mowed that. But, they were still mowing, and they put in these trees. That was the final thing. Which is fine. The trees, they're nice. They're right on our property line, too. Cool. You get to look at them. But then the things happen. Now, they're lucky that that my dad was in his late 50s to 60s by the time this was all happening. Because if he had been in his 20s or 30s, the young version of my dad, he was a lot quicker to anger back then. And little passive-aggressive stuff like that would have probably set him off. But he'd grown mellower with his age, and he was much cooler and calmer about it, and he let it go. And that's probably the lesson here that we're going to get to. Is that maybe you should let things go between your neighbors and you, because it's probably not worth it. But we'll get to that. So soon after all of this happened, they found black mold in their new house that they just paid for to build on there. And they got into a bit of a struggle with the bank. I don't know if they settled or if they just had to forfeit, but they left. This place went empty. But in between when they got into struggle with their bank and the time that they left, they had stopped mowing all of this area, including up to the new trees that they had planted. And the weeds came back all the way up to like 20 feet away from our house. They got nice and thick again. And, we weren't going to mow it because, good grief, they got freaked out about losing maybe 300 square feet of weed lawn. It was certainly not going to mow their area. So, yeah. It all grew back. And eventually, most of the trees survived. The one that was here died. It got choked off by the weeds. And it died. In its young stage as a sapling. Or something like that. And, so eventually, this burning bush, which is what's here now, was ours. It was in our flower beds. Mom decided to move it here after the new people moved in. We got permission from them and did it. It was just like we got permission. Well, I think Dad started mowing this after those people moved out. He started mowing this area again just to keep it down, to keep the pollen down and everything else around it, keep it from spreading into our lawn. So, yeah, but they had stopped mowing it. So all that to do over basically nothing. It was just, a year or so later, it was all over. So, yeah. Don't get into... That's the lesson. Don't get into wars with your neighbors. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. There's a whole show on Investigation Discovery called Fear Thy Neighbor about neighbor wars that went bad and people end up dying and stuff. Don't do it. Let the things go. If you have a little bit of slight, talk it out or let it go. If you have a disagreement with them, just ignore them. Just do it. It's not a good idea. Now, I talked about fences earlier. Let's have a look here. Across the road, you can see a fence. Over there. You can see one. There are two. Those people had a neighbor conflict of sorts between them, and they each built a fence along their line. One would have been plenty, both of them did. They're long, too. They're right along the side of their house. This is one of the few fences you see around here, aside from people who have livestock. And they built that fence They each built their fence because they'd had a problem with each other. And hopefully, I hope the fences make them better neighbors. That's the saying, at least. Good fences make good neighbors. Let's hope so. Because it's just not a good idea to be involved in a neighbor war. It's just not. Don't do it. If you can let it go, let it go. If you try not to escalate. If you have a little bit of conflict, just take a breath, let it go. It's just better. It's better for everybody involved, because there can be collateral damage of your family members and things like that. Just don't do it. Don't do that. Just learn to let things slide. Learn to ignore people if you don't get along with them. It's just better, especially if they're your neighbors. You have to be around them a lot. Don't get into big arguments with them. Let things go. Just let it go. That's the lesson for this. Now, I did mention livestock. I believe the neighbor there still has chickens. These people have chickens. I think across the road they have chickens as well. People don't fence for chickens. They also don't fence for their normal pets. People mostly still have out here, they have dogs and cats. And cats are allowed to wander around just like they are in the city. Nobody seems to mind that neighborhood cats are in their yard. They just don't. Maybe it'll kill some mice. I don't know. It's not going to be a big problem. It's fine. Most people, at least. I'm sure some people get all bent out of shape about your cat wandering around trespassing on my property, but most people don't. And dogs are generally kept in the house. It's cold here in the wintertime. Unless you have like a St. Bernard or some breed that is built for super duper cold, you're probably having it live in your house. So you don't have it living outside. If people have them outside, they build a small fenced in area, like a kennel, for them. And, that might be about the most that you get for fencing for most people. With chickens, people don't fence in, generally, on their own. They'll let them wander. My neighbors over here, they have them, they wander. They go across the road. I've stopped and talked to them and asked them why do they cross the road. But I don't speak chicken and they don't speak English, so they can't give me a solid answer. I would guess that the age-old question of why did the chicken cross the road the answer is probably mostly because it thought that there was better food on the other side of that road. That would be my guess, just knowing animals. So, yeah. But, they have them. People don't pen in their pets too much. They don't let dogs wander around very much either. There'll be some people who have well-trained dogs who they'll wander maybe to the neighbor's place if it's okay. And that's about it. But mostly they keep them inside and they don't wander around much. And that's fairly like the city. But you don't need a fenced-in area for your dog in your backyard, which is what you did there. Unless you have them outside, and then you'll have like a small fenced-in area designed specifically for them, and a kennel. So, yeah. But anyway, that's about it. I've shown you the whole property. We're here now. House is right about here. Anyway, yeah, so that's about it for the video. I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you were entertained. Maybe my lesson goes to heart. Would be a good idea. I think it's pretty good advice. Yeah. Maybe you were informed about something that you didn't know about. Cool. And, there's all that stuff you can do down there. Go ahead and do it if you want to. And I will see you soon. I hope you all have the best possible day that you can have. And take care.